Legends of the Wild West, the frontier's most famous figures. The American Wild West was a place of legends, vast open plains, lawlessness, and fierce determination. Between the mid-1800s and early 1900s, it became the setting for some of the most enduring stories in American history. This was an era of expansion, of boomtowns and outlaws, and of the clash between settlers and Native American tribes. As the United States pushed westward, it wasn't just land that was gained. Heroes, villains, and unforgettable moments were etched into history forever. The Gold Rush and boomtowns. The story of the Wild West truly begins with the California Gold Rush in 1848, when gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill. Almost overnight, thousands of fortune seekers flooded the region, hoping to strike it rich. The promise of wealth and opportunity created boomtowns across the West, bustling places like San Francisco and Deadwood. These towns were alive with miners, merchants, and gamblers, but they also attracted those looking to exploit the chaos, from thieves to outlaws. One famous figure to emerge during this period was Wyatt Earp, a lawman who would become a legend for taming the most dangerous of these frontier towns. Earp was known for his strict sense of justice, and along with his brothers, he established himself in Tombstone, Arizona. Tombstone wasn't just any town. It was the epicenter of a Wild West story that would be remembered for generations. The gunfight at the OK Corral. The town of Tombstone is best known for one event, the gunfight at the OK Corral. It happened on October 26, 1881, and it lasted a mere 30 seconds, but those 30 seconds would go down in history. Wyatt Earp, his brothers Virgil and Morgan, and their friend Doc Holliday, a notorious gambler and gunfighter, faced off against the outlaw Clanton gang. The Earps had been in a feud with the Clantons for months, battling for control over Tombstone. Tensions finally exploded in the streets near the OK Corral. When the dust settled, 3 men from the Clanton gang lay dead. Wyatt Earp's reputation as a lawman who could handle the toughest of situations was cemented, and Doc Holliday's deadly aim became the stuff of legend. Even today, reenactments of the gunfight draw crowds to Tombstone, reminding us of the West's violent past. Outlaws and lawmen. But the Wild West wasn't just about lawmen, it was also about outlaws, men and women who lived outside the law, robbing banks, trains, and stagecoaches. Some became folk heroes, their stories told around campfires and in saloons. One of the most infamous outlaws of the West was Jesse James, a Confederate guerrilla fighter turned bank and train robber. With his brother Frank James and the James Younger gang, Jesse carried out daring heists, often seen as a rebel against wealthy landowners and the railroad companies. His most famous crime was the Northfield, Minnesota raid in 1876, where the gang tried to rob a bank, only to be met with fierce resistance from townsfolk. The raid failed, but Jesse escaped, continuing his life of crime until his betrayal and assassination by a member of his own gang, Robert Ford, in 1882. Another well-known outlaw was Billy the Kid, whose real name was Henry McCarty. Billy's reputation as a gunslinger grew as he took part in the Lincoln County War in New Mexico, a violent conflict between rival factions fighting for control over cattle and land. Legend says Billy killed 21 men, one for each year of his short life, though the real number is likely much lower. He was finally shot and killed by Sheriff Pat Garrett in 1881, but his legacy lives on as one of the most romanticized figures of the Old West. Native Americans and the fight for land. While outlaws and lawmen dominated the headlines, another crucial part of the Wild West story involves the Native American tribes who had lived on the land for centuries. The westward expansion of settlers and railroads led to violent clashes as Native Americans fought to protect their territories. One of the most famous figures in this struggle was the Lakota Sioux leader, Sitting Bull. In 1876, Sitting Bull, along with Crazy Horse, led a coalition of Native American tribes in one of the greatest victories over US forces, the Battle of Little Bighorn. General George Armstrong Custer and his 7th Cavalry were wiped out in what became known as Custer's last stand. It was a brief but powerful moment of resistance against the overwhelming force of the US government. But ultimately, the Native American way of life was irrevocably changed as the West became settled by white Americans. Sitting Bull's defiance made him a symbol of Native American resistance, and though he was later killed in 1890, his legacy endures. The Wild West shows. As the frontier began to close, the mythology of the Wild West only grew stronger, largely thanks to Buffalo Bill Cody. Buffalo Bill was a former scout, soldier, and bison hunter who turned the West into a spectacle with his famous Wild West show. Beginning in the 1880s, Buffalo Bill's show traveled across the United States and even to Europe, featuring reenactments of famous battles, displays of sharpshooting, and performances by real-life Wild West legends like Annie Oakley and Sitting Bull himself. Annie Oakley, often called Little Sure Shot, amazed audiences with her incredible marksmanship. She could shoot dimes tossed into the air, split cards in half with bullets, and perform stunts on horseback. Oakley's talents shattered the stereotypes of women in the West, proving that the frontier wasn't just a man's world. The end of the Wild West. As the 20th century dawned, the West was no longer wild. Railroads crisscrossed the continent, bringing settlers and supplies to even the most remote regions. Towns became more established, lawmen began to gain control, and territories became states. The cattle drives, lawless saloons, and wide-open prairies were replaced with farms, cities, and industry. The closing of the frontier was marked by the Oklahoma Land Rush of 1889, when thousands of settlers raced to claim land previously held by Native American tribes. While the West was becoming tamed, its stories continued to grow, solidifying into the myths and legends that we know today. Figures like Wyatt Earp, Jesse James, Billy the Kid, and Sitting Bull remain iconic symbols of an era where law and lawlessness walked hand in hand.